It seems as if everyone in the Democratic Party establishment and in media all have a case of Beto fever because it's pretty evident that they've been doing everything they possibly can to push Beto O'Rourke. And according to ABC News, Beto mania has become so huge that it casts a shadow over the entire 2020 field, and The Week recently declared that Beto is the new Bernie. And along with this declaration came a picture that is surely going to haunt all of us in our dreams for years to come. Now, the reason why I think we're seeing this sudden push by Democratic Party loyalists is because they see that Bernie Sanders is carrying over the momentum that he had from 2016, and progressives are still very excited about Bernie, so they're hoping that they can maybe peel off enough defectors from the Bernie camp and get them to support Beto O'Rourke because they don't want Bernie Sanders to win. He poses a threat to the status quo, and they want someone who they believe can pass as a progressive who will in fact play patty cake with the establishment and be a little bit more centrist. But the problem with Beto O'Rourke is that the more we learn about him, the less we like him. And the biggest problem with Beto as they try to shove him down the throats of progressives and try to convince us that he's progressive is that he's not progressive. And if you think that I'm just a biased Bernie bro, you don't even have to take my word for it because Beto O'Rourke himself doesn't know if he's progressive because when asked whether or not he's progressive, he said, quote, "I don't know." And he said he's not a fan of labels. Now, if that wasn't enough, as Kyle Kulinski points out here, Beto O'Rourke isn't even in the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which is really the bare minimum because that caucus at large isn't even that progressive, but it's the bare minimum for anyone who wants to pass as progressive. But Beto isn't in that caucus. Rather, he's actually in the moderate pro-Wall Street New Democrat coalition, and when you look at his House voting record, he's actually the 86th most progressive, which makes him even more conservative than Nancy Pelosi. And if that still wasn't enough for you, the group Oil Change USA removed his name from the list of candidates who promised to reject fossil fuel donations because a sludge investigation discovered that Beto actually violated that pledge and took multiple contributions from oil and gas industry executives. Now, if you're still not convinced by all of this, then I feel you, because really what matters is the voting record, and I kind of alluded to certain things that makes it seem as if he's more conservative. I mean, being the 86th most progressive, that's not something that you really want to brag about, but how problematic are his votes? According to a new investigative report by David Sirota, well, he explains that Beto's record is a lot more problematic than any of us imagined. He explains, Capital and Maine reviewed the 167 votes O'Rourke has cast in opposition to the majority of his own party in the House during his 6-year tenure in Congress. Many of those votes were not progressive dissents alongside other far-left leaning lawmakers, but were instead votes to help pass Republican-sponsored legislation. In many cases, Democratic lawmakers said that those measures were designed to help corporate interests dismantle Obama administration programs and regulations. Amid persistently high economic inequality and a climate change crisis, O'Rourke has voted for GOP bills that his fellow Democratic lawmakers said reinforced Republicans' tax agenda, chipped away at the Affordable Care Act, weakened Wall Street regulations, boosted the fossil fuel industry, and bolstered Trump's immigration policy. Consumer, environmental, public health, and civil rights organizations have cast legislation backed by O'Rourke as aiding big banks, undermining the fight against climate change, and supporting Trump's anti-immigrant program. During the previous administration, President Obama's White House issued statements slamming 2 GOP bills backed by the 46-year-old Democratic legislator. O'Rourke's votes for Republican tax, trade, healthcare, criminal justice, and immigration-related legislation not only defied his national party, but also at times put him at odds even with a majority of Texas Democratic lawmakers in Congress. Such votes underscore his membership in the New Democrat Coalition, the faction of House Democrats most closely aligned with business interests. And really, that's just a broad overview of how problematic his House voting record is, but I think to really get a clear picture as to how problematic Beto is, you've got to dive in a little bit deeper and look at specific examples. So in 2013, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau asserted its authority to stop discriminatory lending practices from the auto industry, where African Americans and Hispanics were charged more for auto loans than white customers. Now, in response to this, the GOP introduced legislation to repeal the new rule from the CFPB, claiming they didn't like it because it lacked, quote, openness, whatever that means, and numerous civil rights groups, including the NAACP and even Obama's administration, condemned the GOP's bill because, why shouldn't the CFPB be able to stop discriminatory lending practices? That's what they're there for. They're there to protect consumers. So the GOP essentially chose to declare that they were pro-discrimination. And as loathsome as the GOP was for trying to stop the CFPB from curtailing discriminatory lending practices, can you guess who joined the GOP here? Beto O'Rourke. And he didn't just join the GOP, he co-sponsored the bill that they introduced to stop the CFPB from curtailing discriminatory lending practices. Beto O'Rourke literally co-sponsored a pro-discrimination bill, and he used the GOP talking point to justify his decision. He said they lacked openness. This new regulatory measure by the CFPB lacked openness. That means nothing. They're trying to stop discrimination. Are you for or against discrimination? Now, David Sirota explains that Beto O'Rourke ultimately voted against a CRA resolution that would have killed this new CFPB regulation, but he was still instrumental in setting the stage for its ultimate demise because the GOP repealed it once Trump was elected. But he also supported Republican-backed efforts to curtail the CFPB's regulatory oversight in other ways. He voted with Republicans twice to lift 40-year oil export bans. He also voted for 6 different bills that sought to deregulate Wall Street. He voted to weaken the Volcker Rule in 2014 and again in 2018, which sought to stop banks from using money of depositors for speculative trading. He voted to fast-track the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and even though he voted against the GOP's tax bill, he joined House Republicans in voting for more tax cuts for the rich. So, needless to say, Beto O'Rourke is not the new Bernie. Now, he does do some good things, to be fair to him. I actually respect the fact that he's not taking corporate PAC money, but he's still getting financial contributions from oil and gas executives that exceed $200. Now, I don't know if that has a corrupting influence on him, but it's certainly problematic, to say the least, that he is voting to end oil export bans and basically do things that deregulate Wall Street. This is all very problematic. So, Beto O'Rourke is not the new Bernie Sanders, and I think that what America wants right now is not another pro-corporate centrist Democrat. We want a progressive. So if you're trying to convince us that Beto is the one that's the new Bernie Sanders, yeah, you're going to have to try harder than that, because what he's done thus far is very unlike anything Bernie Sanders would ever even dream of doing. This is completely problematic, and quite frankly, it's grotesque.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.